Hello to everyone watching. My name is Jordan. I'm a curator for JTR Presents. I want to thank you in advance for watching this. I have the privilege and pleasure of getting to speak with Marion Tisdale the fourth here. Marion, thank you so very much for your time.
Much appreciated. Much appreciated. You're welcome.
Yeah. So, as before we get started, a quick recap. So I have the pleasure of showcasing you and your work for this exhibit that's in partnership with Champ and Dawn on especially around the topic and themes around mental health, particularly for men of color. And so when I thought about this, I spoke with William Paul Thomas, I spoke with Carrington Gardner, Johann Askew, and I remember as I was talking mainly with William because of his work, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work,
Yeah, I know,
Cyanosis.
Mill. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot the first thing that came to my mind with this project was that conversation he and I had about the harmful effects and kind of like this sort of stigma within Black culture that we don't talk about our mental health. And I thought about you and our conversations before because I feel like you as an artist and just our time together since knowing each other, a lot of our conversations have talked about the intersections of Blackness and queerness in all the spaces that we occupy. And so it felt appropriate to bring you in on this project because the intersectionality that you speak on through your work, I think is an important topic to bring in. Also, I remember we were talking about not just calling out the trauma, but also acknowledging the healing, which I see you doing in your work, especially with your latest piece that you wanted to showcase. And so, kind of before we get into all of that, I think I want to start with a simple question of with the works that are in this exhibit, how does your work touch on the subject of mental health?
Well, thank you for that question. So, with all the pieces, and let me just make sure I have them all right. The ones that we have are Kwani, Eat of My Fruit, Niggas in Crisis Helpline, and then lastly, The Blood I've Shed to Love You. And so,
That is
all
correct.
of them, yes. And so, all of them came from very different times, and all except one of them on some level were inspired by rage. Kwani came specifically from a lot of my journey. I've lived in Raleigh for almost 30 years at this point. I have been homeless twice. And a lot of the times, and growing up in a neighborhood like College Park, which is where I grew up, shout out to St. Aug, I've essentially watched that neighborhood be eaten alive. And while that is happening, there's also this constant hyper-criminalization of the Black people who live there and hyper-surveillance to the point where even the neighborhood I live now, out by Carnage, is facing that same thing. And no one talks about the idea of someone, even if it's not the best neighborhood, living for in its place for almost 20, 30 years, and then because other places around you are selling, falling apart, property tax, now you have to uproot. And on top of that, you can't fight it because unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, we don't own the houses that we're living in. And Kwani was really to put a face to the fact that like that does still sting. No one like we talk about gentrification, but if you ain't never cried in a moving truck, I don't want to hear your conversation on it respectfully. Because you're not the ones who's actually dealt with it. It's always other people speculating on it. And I really wanted Kwani to be dedicated to that feeling of loneliness and sadness even. And this part about it was I also wanted there to be a humanity with him. And one of my favorite parts on that illustration is his little tattoo that says Kiki. And when that piece was first displayed at Winston-Salem, one of the guards at the museum, Sam, he came up to me and said, "So is he like in love?" And I said, "Maybe." But the importance of that tattoo was to show he had been loved. And we don't talk about the humanizing of people in these situations. So then we look at a piece like Eat of My Fruit. And that was to let go of a lot of anger in regards to the ways in which I was treated going to school. Now, high school Marion was very deep in the closet, but also me being me, gorgeous. So there would unfortunately be times where at this PWI, due to stereotype and hypersexualization, where I at times would be asked about my size, and we'll put it as the nicest term in that way. And the thing about it that always had me messed up is anytime I protested it, it would be treated as if I was in the wrong, as if, well, isn't it a compliment that we think it's big? Isn't it a compliment that we would think of you in this way? And I'm sitting here like, I don't want you to sexualize me. So it's not a compliment because I'm not giving you consent to think of me like that. And then the fact of the matter is, looking back at the history of enslavement, the ways in which Black women's entire reproductive system has been made to be monetized, the fact that we were literally being bred like animals, when you say something like that, you're not saying it in a term of like, you're so beautiful. You're saying in a term of you are property made to produce. And I needed to make a piece that puts somewhere for that anger to go because no one talks about Black boys who are dealing with being fetishized on a level like that. And then because of toxic masculinity, you're taught, well, you should like it. And then we get to Niggas in Crisis Helpline. And that was, it actually ended up not being my first solo exhibition, but it was a piece I made afterward. And that was from my series called Wound. And that came from some very important conversations I had while I was at Morehouse. I am a Morehouse grad in 2021. And I remember one day there's this crazy storm that blew through. I think it was like Hurricane Irma. It was one of them hurricanes with a country name. And so class was canceled because they're like, we don't want to risk the commuters driving in the storm. It was like an insane storm. Like you walked outside, it was a wall of wind, water, and cold. No one wanted to go outside if you could help it. Yeah, it was Atlanta be having some storms. You forget she on the coast, low key. Like, yeah.
I went to SCAD for grad school, and I remember a couple storms. I was like, whoa,
Crazy,
okay,
right?
that's what we
Right.
have out here.
Reminds you of Raleigh a little bit, right? Right.
Worse. I feel like it's
So
worse. Yeah.
Raleigh, the thing with them is they're not consistent. So I can deal with a storm if it's predictable. I'm also from Indiana, so tornado, a crazy storm don't stop me from nothing. I grew up, I've had tornadoes fly by me. Like that's where my country tends to come from. Um,
Mm.
but going back to that day, and I remember like everyone was just chilling, playing video games, eating food, da, 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 da. It's like 3 in the morning. Um, and we'll call those like sad boy hours. Like if you're out with people, it's 3 a.m. The conversation is gonna be really funny or it's gonna be real, usually. And so while sitting there, while talking, and we just all started like opening up with each other. We all been cool with each other. It's been a couple of months. We're all literally stepping to adulthood, this and the third. So there's like this kind of like agreed upon safety that this is not going to be a space of necessary judgment. And so we open up. We open up about the fact that some of us have dealt with sexual abuse and not even just, the traditional sense, but also the ways in which a lot of Black men are sexually abused, where an older woman will prey upon them. And then instead of that being persecuted or seen as destructive or disgusting, they're praised for being assaulted, but not held necessarily. There was one dude who talked about how he's been dealing with a lot of anger just for years because he grew up with his father in the prison system. He's like, I've been a man since I was 12. And we don't talk about that rage, that not even necessarily rage, that like unrest a lot of us had. And for the first time for a lot of us, it was the first time we could say that and not feel like we were the only ones that were dealing with it. I remember after we all opened up, some had shed tears, some were just, in shock. And there was just a silence that fell, a very quiet, hard silence. It wasn't like anything was bad, but it was like everyone's coming to the idea that we are not necessarily alone in these things. And the thing is, I don't even talk to a lot of those dudes still. Like, I don't talk to a lot of them, unfortunately. You grow up, you go live life, and COVID messed up concept with everything. But I still think about how deeply that conversation affected me. And I hope on some level it gave them healing, but it shouldn't take going all the way to college for you to feel that safety. And so that's where Wound comes from and Niggas in Crisis comes from. Because there is a crisis that's constantly silenced. And specifically the piece that you chose, the one where he's on the phone, is actually one of my favorites because all the other ones in the Wound series, Little Billy and Bruce, he's the only one actively trying to fix it. He is the only one actively reaching
Wow.
out. So it's very interesting that that was the one that you chose.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of hitting me fresh. I was gonna I just want to take a moment to appreciate because you already partially answered the next question I had, which was like, what inspires your work as a whole? And I think just tying it back to what you said, starting from a place of rage. And I think this is what I mean when I think about your work is like calling out the injustices, but also your recent work is starting to really call out for the healing aspect. And we can get to
I think
that
it's
in a
breaking up a
moment.
little bit.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So,
It's like lagging. I think she's coming back together. Yeah, yeah,
okay, cool. I think we're back.
yeah.
With Niggas in Crisis hotline, where the individual's the only one like reaching out for help. I feel like that's kind of a transition into your latest work that I want to make room to kind of talk about. Which I think you, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said it's The Blood That I Shed to Love You.
The blood that I shed to love you.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's so profound. Before we get into it, I think it's important to bring up, like I think you mentioned before about talking about the need for brotherhood is sometimes like we have to talk about how we need to, I think it was steward our fellow brothers and not just whenever they are wilding out, we should probably ask the question as to why versus well boys will be boys kind of situation. At least that's how
Exactly.
I understood it.
Yeah, well, because I mean, that's the thing of it. Like we, as a community, we're very like you see something weird, but you don't say anything. And I think part of that also comes with the fact that for years we were very hyper police, and just even sitting in an area not looking put together can get you thrown in jail. So at times the idea, I feel like at times with us, like the idea of calling out someone's mental health, I think kind of triggers this question of, am I putting this person in danger because of it? But then we also have to talk about the fact that that person's already in danger, and it becomes this very slippery slope of how do we navigate it and all these other things about how like quickly it is that you go into a space for mental health, you might say something wrong. You might say, or because you are a black man, if you say something that's a little bit more sharp or has a little foul language, well, you're belligerent and you're violent and you're dangerous now. And now instead of you just getting the help that you needed, you're now have a target on your back. And it happens all the time to black children who are diagnosed with ADHD. Very quickly, they'll unfortunately will fall down a cycle of violence and fighting because the school will almost pit them like that. Like that's the only thing you afford. They won't work with them. And it's becoming this constant thing where yes I'm angry, yes I'm disappointing you, but also what broke you, because that's kind of the thing. It's this, I mean, I even think back to like Gucci Man, the book that he just released, like being a black man with schizophrenia, and how because you're kind of pressured to be like this aggravated confrontational person, a lot of people will ignore those signs and ignore those traumas. And unfortunately, for a very long time, it led to a lot of loss in his life. And I'm happy that it's getting back to it, but it then begs the question, how much bigger of a scale is this? And then we also have to talk about the fact that health issues like schizophrenia have a very long, dark, and racist history. I'm gonna put it like this. If a dog bit you, that dog is more scared of you than you are of it. And so when we come to this discussion about Black men and mental health, Black men and anger, Black queerness and mental health, and Black queerness and anger, we also have to remember that a lot of Black queer young men go through a space in their friendships and their communities where they're essentially abandoned and left alone. I mean, think about like all the male best friends you had up until third grade. And then when you started to show your feminine affectations, how they switched up. Because they went from being your friends to now being your persecutors and the people who are watching you. And all that kind of sits with this dog. And I really wanted there to be the discussion of having to navigate that loneliness and pain. And so that even goes to another character on there, who is like, maybe 13, 14. And if you look in his hand, it has a little like schoolyard note in it that says, "Do you like me? Check yes or no." And unfortunately, the kid holding it, it's obviously scratched out to hell saying no. It even has the word ill written on it. But he's sitting there bloodied and bruised. And there's also a discussion to be had that the idea of navigating adolescence normally as a young black queer man is already taken from me. Because I wasn't going on dates in high school. I didn't have my first date till I was in college. And even then, I wasn't in a space where I could tell my parents about my first date. I remember talking to my straight friend Dave, who for some reason was just in the room. But I was like, I'm trying not to be angry, but I was like, I don't see the big deal. My parents are terrible. I'm like, yeah, but they didn't shame you for wanting to be loved. And that all leads to the idea of the ways in which I arrange the pieces. And if you look at, the top two characters who are like below this couple that's in love, one, they're the most femme presenting because not to be too crass, it takes balls to decide to be feminine, black, queer, and young. And we forget a lot of times that the femmes are the ones holding up this community by its edges a lot of the time. but I also made it so that they were the only ones looking up with hope. And I did that because at the end of this, when you reach some level of autonomy, when you reach the idea of being who you are, there is a divine beauty in that that almost doesn't even have words. And considering the fact that I've made so many pieces discussing Black men's mental health, and we've been bloody, and we've been bruised, and sure they've called up for help, I haven't made many pieces dedicated to the hope you have to survive it. On how that hope is a very radical thing to have, and it's unapologetically beautiful. So on top of it being like a piece that I'm very excited to, because at the time it's not finished, so no shade. To finish, there's also a piece that might end up being one of my favorites because instead of going the right of the horrific or the aggravated, I went the right of hopeful. And I wanted the name itself to really encapsulate that. Because there is not necessarily bloodshed, but there is a metamorphosis that is going to hurt that you have to go through to be a queer Black man who is comfortable in themselves. And not just queer Black men, queer mass in general, who is comfortable in themselves. And even now with my own dating, I'm still dealing with people who are like, I don't do femmes. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. It brings me back to the idea of like, you're broken, what broke you, and woo woo woo. But also, are you going to have that conversation? And why is it that you have to perform these things? And I say I
Right.
like to say that that's really where this piece really came to a lot of conversations that I am constantly having with other people and also with myself. Because like even as sweet as your compliment was about like my hair for the first time, this even my hair, like it being colorful and changing it and the braids and the twists and the locks and this and the third, that was my own like transition into it. It's to really accepting myself because I had to kind of learn that to have a little bit of tough skin. I remember the first time I wore box braids and I decided the beats were going to be like a pastel rainbow. And like I'm chilling, group of teenagers come up to me, which, honey, if you're young, if you are an adult and you are queer, and a pack of teenagers come up to you, you're either going to get roasted or told you look amazing. I got both. Because one said your hair is like really, really
Won't they
nice,
do it?
and right, and walked away. And as I walked on, one of the boys, "Are you gay?" Like in the background screaming it, and I'm sitting here like, okay, I could say something smart back because how do I put this? I'm a fairy that used to fight. That even goes back to the other piece in the show, the fight of the fairies. Um, but I didn't necessarily want to start anything, so I just walked away. But like this constant you're constantly put to the test on how much you love yourself and is that enough to kind of break through the ways in which other people perceive you. Because I easily could have turned around and said, well, all y'all wearing hats and hoodies that are stained. So we could start there. But because I'm trying to practice peace and not necessarily retaliate, I just chose to keep to myself. But that did remind me even of Fight of the Fairies, which talked about the fact that even while I was in college, stepping to my own femininity in this group of friends who I still love to death and I wish them the best, when it came to stepping into our identities, we were literally full on physically fighting because we didn't want to be the most feminine in the group. The gag is half of us are
Mm,
non-binary now, but
wow.
the fact of the matter is there are memories I have of literally like trying to actively how do I put this? Trying to literally beat the femininity out of my friend while proving I didn't have any, and vice versa.
Mm, mm.
And so when it comes to the blood I have shed to love you, it goes to all of that. And it's really felt like a piece that has allowed me to let go of some of that anger, but also invite other, just any young queer person, young queer Black person, to kind of take a seat and know that there are others who have come before you, there are others who have survived it, and there are ancestors who are rooting for you. I am rooting for you.
And I as well. I don't have anything else to say. I just kind of want to sit in that. I think it's best. So with that, I thank you so much for this. And I just want to
We
sit in that
appreciate
peace.
it.